Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session. My name is Zarif Munir, and I'm one of the founding directors of Eduko Pathways. We are an education enablement company with offices in Sri Lanka, Singapore, and Bangladesh, and our ambition is to help students reach their potential. We believe that teachers are one of the most important building blocks of student development. Teachers invest significant time encouraging students to be the best they can be, and in the times in which we live, the role of teachers has become even more important. With that in mind, Eduko Pathways, in partnership with Monash College, has designed a teacher development program, especially for you. The first part of this program will be delivered today. We've received a great number of teachers who have expressed interest in attending the program and will be offering the same program throughout the year. With this in mind, please permit me to thank and welcome Ms. Jo Mitten, the CEO of Monash College, Ms. Sarah Harris, the Trade and Investment Commissioner of South Asia with Austrade, and the Daily Star, our media partner. After hearing from Jo and then Sarah, I will hand it over to Rowan Bates, the Head of Teaching and Learning from Monash College, to walk us through the presentation. Jo, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Zarif, and thank you to Eduko Pathways for partnering with us in this teacher development session today. I'd also like to thank Sarah from Austrade for the support that Austrade are providing in enabling us to run this program. And it's important to note that we're grateful for Austrade's support, not just in Bangladesh, but wherever we operate the college operations globally. Some of you will be familiar with Monash College. I assume many of you are familiar with Monash University. But Monash College provides pathways for international students to access Monash University, either at our Melbourne campus, here where I'm based, or at our Kuala Lumpur campus in Malaysia. For those of you who are not perhaps as familiar with the college's operations, I'll just give a quick overview of the college and talk a little bit also about our virtual classrooms. So Monash College is owned 100% by Monash University, and our mission is to transform students' lives. We do that by giving them access to one of the world's top universities. It doesn't matter what ranking system you look at, Monash University is ranked in the top 100 in the world. More than 85% of our foundation year and diploma year students transition to Monash University each year across the full spectrum of all of the faculties of the university. The college's primary campus is in Melbourne, but we also have operations in multiple other countries, including China, India, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and hopefully soon here in Dhaka in Bangladesh. Through this partner network, students study exactly the same curriculum in their home country as they would have studied had they travelled to Monash College, Melbourne. And when they graduate, if they achieve the right scores, they are guaranteed entry into Monash University. But we're not just preparing them for their university course, we're also preparing them for life at university and for their professional careers beyond completion of their degrees. And of course, key to all of that are our teachers. Our teachers are deeply committed professionals, and they are very invested in the students' success. Now, like many of you in Bangladesh, here in Australia, we have been in lockdown and we've been unable to teach in our normal way in classrooms. In fact, we stopped receiving international visitors into Australia nearly 12 months ago. So we've been unable to welcome new students to our shores, and in the face of that, our teachers have responded remarkably well to the challenge of online learning, and they've created an outstanding virtual classroom experience for our students. The approach is based on the same approach we use in our face-to-face classes, and the virtual classroom provides a very rich learning experience and an enhanced student support model to support our students through this very challenging time. It is only a temporary measure in response to the border closures, and when we're able to welcome students back to Australia, they'll be joining us once again in the classrooms, and they'll be receiving the benefit of our not only our teaching staff and our support staff, but we are in the process of building a brand new campus in the vibrant Dockland area of Melbourne CBD. In the meantime, we're working very closely with Eduko Pathways to establish our first international campus in Bangladesh. We want to be able to offer Bangladeshi students exactly the same opportunities as their colleagues right across the Asia-Pacific region. And Eduko Pathways, with its vision of where students come first, is the ideal partner, especially because of its close links with one of our already successful collaborators, Universal College Lanka in Sri Lanka. So that's just a short introduction to the college, and if you'd like to know more, please reach out through marketing@monashcollege.edu.au, and we can answer any of your questions, and you can find detailed information on our website. I'd just like to finish by briefly discussing the purpose of today's session and how it links to our teaching ethos. We're absolutely thrilled that we have so many teachers engaging with us today to learn a little more about the Monash College way. Our teaching methodology is built on our teaching excellence framework, which we developed over many years and which we've invested in quite considerably. And this framework is built on the principles of excellence, clarity, and consistency. Together, they ensure that our teachers have the support they need to strengthen the highest possible classroom standards for our students. Now, Rowan Bates, who is running today's session, has been with the college for many years, and a large part of Rowan's role is to develop our own teachers here in Melbourne. He's passionate about teacher development because he knows that the best teachers are also lifelong learners, as I'm sure all of you know as well. The training that you'll receive today was developed by Rowan and his team for delivery to our Monash College teachers here in Melbourne. I have no doubt it will play a valuable part in your own professional development, and we also look forward to your feedback on the training itself and any suggestions for improvement based on your experience in Bangladesh, because as we know, learning is a two-way street. So we would welcome any feedback and comments you might feel you'd like to provide to us after the session. I really do thank you for giving up part of your day today to take part in our teacher development session. We very much look forward to coming into Bangladesh in partnership with Eduko Pathways in hopefully the near future. And I hope you all have a very enjoyable session with Rowan. And I'm now going to hand over back to 𝗘𝗱𝗓. Thanks, 𝗘𝗱𝗓.
Joe, thank you so much. I'd like to invite Sarah for a few words before we get started with Rohan.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me clearly?
Yep.
Great. And just to start, thank you, Joe, for those remarks. Australia is very happy to support Monash in all of the markets where you are operating. So thank you all. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here today. On behalf of the Australian Trade Investment Commission, I'm delighted to welcome you to the Monash College Teachers Training Initiative organised by Eduko Pathways. During the training, we think you'll hear from Monash speakers and guests on a thought-provoking discussion, which will include the future of education and its impacts on society and the economy. Bangladesh is home to a rising urban middle class and characterised by a burgeoning young population with an appetite for education, which supports social mobility. And there's no better place to access this education than in and with Australia. Australia is consistently recognised globally for its research excellence, livability, learner satisfaction, and employment outcomes. Australian universities have built a trusted reputation for world-class education, training, and research built upon years of international alumni success, industry-aligned qualifications, and continuous innovation. Australia offers student-centric education system which has helped thousands of students every year from all over the world achieve academic and professional success. Our students can choose from over 30,000 courses from over 1,200 registered education providers and also access a range of scholarship options. The Australian government values and appreciates the benefits of both our countries in having Bangladeshi students in Australia, and we look forward to strengthening this partnership with Bangladesh in the years ahead. I'd end with just congratulating Monash College, Eduko Bangladesh, and all those involved in bringing this event together today. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all a successful training session. I'm sure this experience will be productive for you, your institutions, and the students. Thank you very much. I'll hand back over to ظریف.
Thank you again, Sarah. Rowan, over to you for the rest of the event.
Well, thank you very much. What an amazing introduction. I feel like I'm launching a new Tesla. It's quite incredible. This is a great honour, and I just really wanted to say how much joy I think we're going to get out of this afternoon, and how much joy this brings me to present this training. I'll just bring up some slides. Go through. No. There we are. So as ظریف introduced me, I'm the head of teaching and learning at Monash College. And today is all about explicit instruction. But before we talk about explicit instruction, I thought I can always take this opportunity to talk a little bit about myself in front of 580 participants. That doesn't always happen, so I'll be very brief though. Look, I guess we have to ask ourselves, whenever we run teacher training, why do we do it? Why do we teach? And the reason I teach, and the reason I went into teaching, is because it's one of the most complex and interesting professions you can possibly apply yourself to. I remember going to a conference once where the keynote speaker said, teaching is more complicated than chess. There are billions of combinations in any single classroom, and teachers have to somehow figure out these combinations and make a lesson work. So it is a very complex profession. It's a difficult profession. It's not rocket science, it's harder, in my opinion. And it's also a profession that can have a profound impact on human beings. My teaching journey began several years ago, but I didn't go straight into teaching. I actually started my career as a management consultant and business analyst, and I did that for a while, but I knew at that point that something was missing. And so I went back and studied teaching, and I actually did my teaching training in science and biology. And my first class, new teacher, very enthusiastic. The first couple of weeks, I went up to one of the students, one of the brighter students in the class, and I asked the student, "How are you going?" And he said, "Oh, not so well." I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "I don't understand." I said, what do you mean you don't understand?" He said, "I don't understand anything." And I thought to myself, this is very interesting. This is a really bright student, a very capable student, and I thought I'd been teaching effectively, and he's telling me he doesn't understand anything. And what it turned out to be is that basically it was really a problem with my teaching practice, that I was not breaking things down in a way which helped him to understand, even though he was a bright student. And I guess that sort of inspired me a little bit, as have many interactions with students over the years, to really figure out what works in teaching practice. What really adds value to the student experience in teaching practice. And one of those things, one of those practices, is explicit instruction. And there's a whole lot of research around the value of explicit instruction as we go through this session. I might point to some of it, but won't be able to point to all of it. Okay, so what is explicit instruction? Well, look, at its simplest point, it's breaking down information so students can understand. And that's a very simple sentence, but it's a very difficult thing to do. How do you make someone understand? You've got several different levels of understanding in the class, of capability in the class. You've got several different definitions of what understanding looks like and means. So explicit instruction has to figure out ways of building understanding for all students. And then you've got to give students the capability to use information in another way. So they understand, sure, but can they use it? Are they interested in using information? It's like a bit like Picasso. Picasso learnt how to paint classical portraits, and he learnt the basic fundamental skills for classical portraiture. But then he expanded into a very brave new world of application of those skills. So there is that concept that you first make people understand, but then you've got to lead them to the point where they can really use information. And the last point is really difficult, and that's about differentiation. You've got to be able to adjust your practice in explicit instruction to meeting the different levels of understanding amongst students. So there is a, it's a really interesting area, but a tricky thing to do. So I guess, what is it? And this is what it is. This is what it contains. It contains language adaptation, modelling, questioning, reinforcing tasks, setting up reinforcing tasks, monitoring and feedback, and scaffolding, and then reviewing information. So, there's those elements, not easy. And I guess we're going to discuss some of those elements today. So the first thing I'd like to do, I could just bring it up. In the chat, I've just shared a link in the chat. So hopefully I'll be able to share that with you. And that link, so here we go. So I'm just sending that through now. Does everyone have that link? There we go. So you might just link to that document there. And we're just going to start, our first activity for the day, which is learning a little bit about explicit instruction. Now, my aim for the day is to set this up in a way which models explicit instruction. So this presentation really should represent what explicit instruction looks like, I suppose. So the first activity, and I'll bring it up on my screen as well. Okay. So if I just bring this up on my screen, you have an activity there, and you'll all have access, your own individual access to that activity. So it won't show up in this document necessarily. Some people may show up, but most people, it will not show up. We won't get 595 people showing up in the document. But could I just ask you, just in the first instance, just to fill in just the component of explicit instruction. So I've filled in one here, language adaptation, where you adapt language based on the ability level or the competency level of the student. The other is setting and reinforcing tasks, you set reinforcing tasks through a teacher's presentation. Monitoring and feedback is also just matching that definition there. Reviewing of information, matching the definition there. So I've matched some of them in. Could you just have a go at the other four or the other three terms, just matching those with the definition? And I'll give you just a moment to do that. Okay, well done. That's correct. That's wonderful. So this is, I mean, how do you feel? I should ask. So I guess do these things, are these things familiar? I imagine that many of these things will be familiar to you. So this is correct. This is language adaptation. Breaking processes into small steps is an example of modeling. Adjusting questions using different types of questions is questioning, and the rest we go through. So scaffolding as well is when you build up skills and then take away the scaffold, and that's different from modeling. Modeling is where you break things down and show how things interact, but scaffolding is actually when you're building up to different levels, a higher level of difficulty, and then you take away the scaffold as you do it. You'll see exactly what I mean as we go through the examples. So first of all, a simple exercise, but one that is explicit, if you like, in that it just builds that understanding initially. But these things I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So the other thing I just want to say about explicit instruction, this is what it involves, but there are some common concepts throughout all of these 7 concepts of explicit instruction. And the first one is it's time and patience. It's interesting, teachers give approximately 2 minutes. That's the average that teachers give to students to answer questions. 2 minutes in a class, and then they start getting a bit impatient. Now, I gave you about 2 minutes for that activity as well, and I started to get a little bit impatient. So I'm not sure if I'm modeling the best practice here, but it is just a natural thing for teachers because they know the material so well to not quite give enough time and to be a little bit anxious about moving on with the tasks. Often more time is better. So in explicit instruction, the need for time and patience is really important. The other thing is it's repetition, and that can be a bit boring for teachers. It can be difficult to repeat things because, again, you really want to be discursive. You really want to be a bit more didactic. You really want to show what you know. And sometimes students are not ready for that. So it does require repetition of information, but in new contexts and forms so that students don't get bored. But teachers do need to check themselves sometimes and slow down and repeat. and that's really a central part of explicit instruction. The other thing is confidence, student confidence. I think we sometimes forget as teachers just how much students lack confidence. They appear sometimes to be very confident in the way they dress and act, and they appear to be very confident, but at their heart, young students don't really have that much confidence, particularly sometimes with academic material. They need that confidence built up. And part of patience and time and repetition is to build up confidence so that they can get this mastery of the information. So I think that's just important to remember as we go through. So the other thing I think just to point out is that these things do interact. So modelling, breaking things down into separate parts, interacts with scaffolding. Setting follow-up tasks interacts with monitoring and feedback. Scaffolding interacts with reviewing. So there is a lot of interaction between these things. Okay, so we've gone through those. I won't go over those again because I think it'll become much clearer as we see the examples. Just before we show some examples of explicit instruction, I just wanted to point out a few things here. Why do it? And I guess at this point, if I don't convince you of why we should do it, you can switch off the session if you want to. That's a bold claim, I know. I hope you don't. I really do hope you don't. And I see the number going up, not down. Oh, it went down again. So, all right. So please don't switch off. But I think it's important to convince everyone why do it? Why bother with explicit instruction? And these are really the major reasons, is that it builds this memory. And we remember roughly 40% of a particular lesson. In a lecture or a tutorial, in a lecture it's less than that. Explicit instruction has been shown to build about 60% memory of content. And I'm hoping at the end of today's session, because this is a session built around the ideas of explicit instruction, that people remember over 60% of it. And in a week's time, they will remember it and come back to it. The other thing is this understanding, as we talked about before, this idea that you build an understanding of the material by breaking it down and allowing students to rebuild it themselves. The other way you build understanding is to show what good looks like, what effective looks like. So explicit instruction, because of its modelling, really is able to demonstrate what good looks like. And that helps students to understand what they're meant to be trying to do. But by breaking things down, they're also trying to understand how to get there. So mastery as well, because students know what good looks like, they can build this mastery of the material. They're able to say, look, this is the level I want to get to. And when I get to that level, I can also manipulate the information. So scaffolding is able to build that mastery. And confidence comes with all of these things. If you can remember information, if you can understand it, and you can master it because you're applying it to new situations and environments, then you're going to have confidence as well. So there's lots of good reasons to practice explicit instruction. So what I'd just like to do now, folks, is just show you an example of explicit instruction in action. And while you're looking at this example, you might just be thinking to yourself, what am I seeing here? What are the 7 elements I'm seeing here? Am I seeing modeling? Am I seeing language adaptation? And am I seeing scaffolding. Am I seeing one of those things being applied here? So just relax and enjoy. I'll just share the sound with everyone. A few seconds at the start without sound, but it will play soon.
We're going to do a race to see who can match the definitions with the words first. You will notice that the slides are blank because I didn't want anyone to look at them before class. So I'm going to put them in now, but let me put you into breakout rooms. You're going to work in breakout rooms in teams to match the definitions and the words. And as soon as you've completed them and you think they're correct, call me to the breakout room, okay? And I will come and check. So we'll do 6 breakout rooms. And we'll do some random groupings this time. And I need to put in the words to match. So there they are. All right. Group 3 was the first team to finish. So I've got my answers up there on the screen. Can you all see them?
Yes.
Yes? So just have a quick look and see if there were any that you missed in your groups. This is our vocabulary related to critical thinking. All right. Any questions about any of those? Let's do some quick pronunciation of these words since these are terms we're going to be working with, okay? Let's just look at the stress, pronunciation. Audience. Where's the stress on this word? Audience. Which syllable? Ah, first syllable. Great. Audience. Repeat audience.
Audience.
Audience. Audience. Audience.
Audience.
Audience.
Good.
Okay, so I guess there's just a few things. Just a few things there. This is an English language class, so the students are at, bridging to university, which means they're learning English. So it does have to be very explicit, if you like. So, a couple of the things that were done there, and I'll just bring it up on this slide, is that what she did is she explained the task using clear, simple sentences. So she adapted her language for that level. She had a task with drag and drop functions. Again, this kind of task with drag and drop functions is is a form of modeling, if you like, because you're breaking the vocabulary and the definition into parts and allowing the students to match those parts. It's a very simple form of modeling, but that's what it represents. She monitored the students in different rooms, in different breakout rooms, to see their tasks in action. She stopped and gave answers at the appropriate time, and then she modelled pronunciation at the end as well. So look, that's just a fairly quick, simple example of some of these things in action. Now, if we look at another follow-up example,
You should have done your video yesterday, which talked about the 4 stages of the critical thinking framework. Can you remember what the 4 stages are? If you remember, you can type them into the boxes. The order that you do them. What's the order? Remembers, go ahead and put them in for me. Great. I know you did your homework. Wonderful. So zoom out and zoom in, connect it to something, and then respond to it. So we're going to kind of work through this critical thinking framework today. We're going to now try to apply those 4 stages to an example text that you've already seen. So we're going to look again at this marketing and consumer psychology text that you used. I think it was Monday we read this in class. So you should be familiar with this, this text, but you might need to remind yourself of what it is. So we're going to go and do the zoom out stage first.
Okay, so.
And I'm going to put you back with groups. We have 6 groups.
So, I mean, she's using guiding questions here, and she's related it back to the initial task. So you may just want to think about, why have these guiding questions, and how are they related back to her initial discussion of the theory?
Groups, and these are our zoom out questions, just thinking more broadly about it. So you can open that link if you need to remind yourself of this text, and just work with your group and answer these questions, okay? And I will put you back into your breakout rooms. There you go.
Okay, so there were just a few things that she did there, and look, all of these seem really simple, and I guess that's the idea. They really should seem simple and straightforward and clear. because they are explicit. But just a few of the things she did. She asked the students to do a follow-up activity from the day before. She related the new exercise involving answering questions to components of the previous review task about zooming out. So those questions in boxes that you saw were related to the previous task that she talked about of zooming out. The teacher had 4 guiding questions which demonstrated what was meant by zoom out, and then she broke the students into groups and then monitored groups to check that they understood the task. So, you know, these are 4 fundamental things that she did in that lesson. And I guess the reason she did it was to, if you consider it, and the first thing was the first component of explicit instruction. By doing this, she was reviewing the information of the day before, sure, and she linked that back. She reinforced the task, so she reinforced the information from the initial task with new follow-up tasks. She was modelling by having the 4 guiding questions, which demonstrated what she meant by the zoom out idea of zooming out. And she also had monitoring and feedback because she broke the students into groups, then monitored the groups to check that they understood the task. So what's happening here is that she's building these concepts of explicit instruction. Now, I just wanted to show you one further example, and with this one we'll do a little bit of an activity around it. Okay, so sweet.
We are back, so I'm just going to share my screen and I'm going to just call on some students to tell me their thoughts on this essay. So Marvin, which sentences were reflection sentences? Where was the student reflecting?
Section 2.
So which sentences? What number sentences?
2.
2?
So you just notice there a couple of things. First of all, there's a visual model which has numbered parts to it, and secondly, she asks follow-up questions when there's a problem, when she detects a problem with student understanding.
Number 2. So in your introduction, do you reflect on something? What's the purpose, Marvin, of an introduction? Why do you write an introduction?
Perhaps something.
To describe something, but why? So why do you write an introduction? What's the main reason?
You can see here. I mean, this is difficult. It requires a lot of patience. It requires the teacher to be very thoughtful of the student level of understanding. And it's not all that exciting sometimes for the teacher. It is a difficult sort of form of practice, but a really necessary one to gauge the level of understanding. You can see there that the student doesn't quite understand. You can see there that the student is just searching to understand, and the teacher, through both the model and the questioning, is helping to help the student to arrive at the understanding.
Let me write an introduction.
Introduce some background.
Very good. Background. Anything else?
And background. What happened?
What happened? Maybe, okay. So let's go back to the cycle again. Okay. So in our introduction, we introduce something. So we introduce the theory. So remember Jane mentioned the theory in the introduction. We give a brief summary and we give background information, and then we give a linking sentence. So do you think that we would write our reflection in our introduction?
No.
No. Okay. So sentence number 1 or sentence number 2, what these recommendations.
So she finally got there after several prompting questions, finally got to the point where the student understood that they do not write reflections in the introduction, and therefore understood what a reflection was. So it took, several layers of questioning and a model to understand that point. And I guess when we talk about building understanding through explicit teaching, that's kind of what we're talking about.
Recommendations are particularly relevant. So sentence 2, what's the relationship between sentence 1 and sentence 2? Yeah. Anyone want to help? So after your point, remember peel, P-E-E-L. You give your main point. What comes next?
Explanation.
Like an explanation, yeah, some type of supporting sentence. And notice this is a linking word, or sorry, a referring word. These, this is a cohesive device. So these recommendations is connecting or linking back to the recommendations of the sustainable guidelines that you read about on Monday. So sentence 2 is supporting or making sentence number 1 strong. So sentence 1 and 2 are still talking about the theory. Yeah. Very good. Okay, so sentence 1, 2 are they going to be talking about the theory or like introducing the theory. Very good. See the green?
Yeah.
So this little task, she's got the model and then she's got this little task. I guess you've got to think about what is the element of explicit instruction there? What does that represent? Now, the connection between the structure and then the students picking out the elements of that structure and then the use of questioning to explore those elements is really demonstrating what explicit instruction looks like. Now, as I said, it's hard going for the teacher. It's a lot of patience. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of persistence. But the students eventually get to the point where they gain that level of understanding, and such is the power of using explicit instruction techniques.
Yeah, I still agree.
What is this? In reflective writing, we apply a something to our experience. What do we apply?
Yeah.
A theory. Excellent, May. Okay, so remember the theory, Sam, was about sustainable consumption. Remember that article on Monday that you read? So the student is referring to or connecting back to the theory. So that's an analyzing there.
Okay, so I've just got, just on this this activity 3, and it's great that some people have done it as well, which is great. There are must be some people with access, which is good. But I think you should all have access to your copy. Now, that was example 3. So if you could just go to example 3, activity 3 in your document, so about explicit instruction activities, just example 3, activity 3, and then put in the component and I'll just bring it up on my slides, but it's in your document. And if you don't mind, I might just delete a couple of those. All right, so I'll just bring that up. So this one is modeling. Sorry if I'm deleting your work there, but I think most people should have access to their own version of this that they can type in. So what was there was questioning, and we saw that questioning. We saw monitoring and feedback, and we saw modeling. I'm just wondering if you could type into your document where you saw or what example of modeling or monitoring and feedback, just do one of them, what example of modeling or monitoring and feedback you saw in that example. So that's really good, guys. Thank you very much. I'm sure you've got a copy of all of yours, but you're absolutely right that I'll just go to modelling first. There was a clear visual model, and she was able to use that model to actually break down the different parts of an essay and show what part was each part. So she was able to explain through questioning. So this is where these things interlink, is questioning using very specific questions also as a form of modelling, because you're breaking things down. You're breaking things down into little parts and showing how they fit together. So her questioning allowed the student to sort of understand what the reflective part of an essay was. And so hence it was also a form of modelling. And the monitoring and feedback, she could visibly monitor the tasks students were doing. And look, this idea of visible monitoring, so she had a visible model and also a visible monitoring of their answers, is incredibly powerful. I'm sure you do it as teachers, but there's a whole line of research about visible learning and the effect that visible learning has on the capacity of the student to understand both what they're doing, the task, and the feedback they're getting. And that visible learning is a really important component of modelling. So whenever you can make something visible, do it. And in the virtual classroom space, there's actually probably more opportunities for visible learning than there is in the traditional classroom space. I'm not sure about scaffolding. So it's hard to know, because we didn't see the scaffold being taken away. We didn't see the point where the students were asked to extend their understanding a little bit more. So she may have later on said, okay, here is a model of writing that's not broken down into parts. Here's a model of writing that hasn't got numbers in it. Identify the reflective parts of that model. So she may have just sort of said, later on, and that would have been an example of scaffolding. So look, thanks very much for those responses. So these are, the answers that I'll go through here. So what she did, for example 3, she had good close monitoring and feedback. She could see how students progressed with the tasks, that she could monitor their response on the shared PowerPoint. Therefore, feedback is visible. She also filled gaps in student knowledge immediately by referring to previous information and asking follow-up questions. So that's exactly right, and that's what someone was putting into the slide, which is wonderful. And also the modelling. There was a visual model of the form of the writing model, broken down into the parts. The teacher refers to this when asking questions. She also completes parts of the task before asking students to complete the rest of the task. So she models what good practice is, and then she takes time to talk about how the parts are connected, so how the introduction is connected or not connected with reflective writing. So there were elements of that was being seen. I couldn't see scaffolding at that point, because scaffolding is very specific to providing a model and then taking the model away. So if she showed a model of the essay and then took that model away later on and allowed students to fill things in, then that would be the scaffold that she's building. Okay, so thanks very much. Okay, so now I'm going to take a little bit of the scaffold away myself. So in previous exercises, they've been quite scaffolded. So I've built the exercises so that they are scaffolded, so that we start with filling in the terms, and then we go to filling in the description of those terms. This one is a little bit less scaffolded as well. This is taken, so the last examples have been taken from English classes, but this example is actually taken from a tertiary level physics class, so a university level physics class. And I think this is an important point to make, is that this scaffolding or this explicit instruction is not just related to primary or secondary years, it's also related to the tertiary years as well. Okay, so
if we are saying,
I'll just bring this up to
because here is positive, balloon is negative. Okay, can you see that the hairs are standing up? Yes? You see that? Yes. And the way I move the balloon, the hair moves as well, right? Do you see that? If I bring it back, it comes back. If I go, it's like a symphony. It's like Mozart. It goes here and here. Why is it doing it? Why is it following the balloon? What do you think? Why is it following the balloon? It's still up. Look, it's still up. Why is it following the balloon? Can someone type it for me? The balloon got negative. Yes, because, thanks, Jay. Forces of attraction, right? The balloon is negative, the hair is positive. What else is it going to do? But why is the hair standing up and separate from one another? Do you see that? The hairs are not touching each other. It's like they want to go away from each other. Why is it? Why is the brilliance? Brilliant. Thanks, Lillian. Because the hairs are positive, and positive will repel positive, of course. Correct? Okay. Now, I did this to show you something else, actually. To show you something else. Okay, let me get something else for you. All in the name of science, guys. You put your body on the line. It's okay. So you got this part, right? Now I'm gonna rub it on my beard. It's the same. I'm still gonna get a negative charge on the balloon, right? I'm still gonna get a negative charge on the balloon. Now you tell me, if I'm getting a negative charge on the balloon, and if I bring it close to a piece of paper, what do you expect to happen? The paper is neutral, mind you. A neutral object is paper. If I bring a negative charge, which is the balloon I'm rubbing on my hair, I know it's not positive, it's negative. What do you expect to happen to the paper? Nothing will happen. Normally, nothing should happen, right? Because paper is neutral. The paper is neutral. Let's see if something happens. This is the paper, right? You can see the paper? Let's see if something happens. Whoa, something does happen, right? Something does happen. The paper does lift up. Correct? So, yes, Jabulani is in the right track. So the paper lifts up. That would let you think that the paper is what charge? Well, it got attracted, didn't it? That would make you think, what charge is the paper? Positive? But wasn't the paper neutral? Wasn't it? Okay. This confusion or this brilliant dilemma brings you to the notion of polarization. What is really happening? Okay. Let me share the screen. Okay, my pen go here. Okay, let me share the screen. Now, okay.
Okay, so I don't know about you, but there's something about the 𝗘𝗱𝘂𝗸𝗃 rubbing a balloon on his beard that I just couldn't look away from. It's almost mesmerizing. So he really put his body on the line for that in order to model practice. So we don't have time, unfortunately, to do activity 4, but you'll see there that this is less scaffolded. So basically pulled a bit of the scaffold away, and it requires higher level application of skills, because you have to say, did you see it? You have to pick out if it was there or not there throughout the video, and then also describe the method. So then you've got to go a little bit further and say, okay, well, how would you improve this example? So this is scaffolded in the sense that you're now being asked to go a bit further in the application of these concepts of explicit instruction. So, you know, if we just go through that video, what we saw there was language adaptation. He made a complex subject quite simple. The modeling, the use of his body to model and break down the components of the concepts into different parts, and to represent polarization is a really important part of the effectiveness of that demonstration. Lots of questioning to different students about that concept, and at different levels as well of questioning. There was a visual task after he rubbed the balloon on his head and beard. There was a visual task through a computer program that followed up on that and allowed students to answer questions around that concept. And then he gave feedback to given student answers. So what we saw there are several components of explicit instruction being demonstrated in a lesson. And you can see there you really have to work quite hard to get explicit instruction across. So I guess, look, there are further examples in the slides, but I won't go through them. There are other examples of graphic organizers that I'd love to show, but we won't have time to do it today. But I suppose there's just a couple of things to think about as we've gone through the concepts today. Did you see examples of explicit instruction in the activities, in the way this presentation was delivered? So was there examples of that? And what we tried to do in the presentation today was to build explicit instruction into the presentation by having activities that built on each other and then were scaffolded so that they gradually got more complex and more difficult. The idea, we weren't able to give much monitoring and feedback because of the activities couldn't be monitored today. We were hopefully able to adapt a bit of language to make it understood. So I suppose the idea today was to model some of the elements of explicit instruction. So I guess the answer to, you know, was the session effective as a demonstration of explicit instruction, is at the end of this session, it's only 1 hour, so it's very hard, I suppose, to get all the points of explicit instruction across in 1 hour. But how much of it will you remember? Will it be over 60%? Will you remember all of the elements of explicit instruction? Modeling, scaffolding, language adaptation, questioning. So in terms of understanding, could you effectively apply these elements to examples? So in those activities, was your understanding built by being able to apply parts of explicit instruction like language adaptation to the examples, to the parts of the examples? Was confidence established today, do you feel that you could do the activities effectively and are interested in applying this to your own practice? And mastery, could you use it in your practice? So could you use questioning, could you use modelling, could you use scaffolding in your practice? And so I guess that's the reflection piece is, you know, if you can answer perhaps a yes to some of those questions, then there will have been a sort of an effective session today. But I wouldn't expect everyone to be able to answer yes to that, because as we talked about right at the start, explicit instruction requires repetition. It requires follow-up and reinforcement to get those points across. So thanks very much. I think we have some time for some questions. I think there was going to be some questions maybe in the chat that have come through. I don't have access to the chat, so maybe some questions from participants through the chat or through the another method. I don't think I can unmute. Yes. 𝗘𝗱𝗂𝗸𝗚𝗓, did you have a question? Sorry, I can't hear. Nazma, did you have a question?
Yes, the question is, please, can you explain how to do scaffolding work for grade 5? Because I'm teaching in grade 5.
Oh, grade 5. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, look, scaffolding. It depends, I guess, on the particular area you're teaching, but scaffolding is all about starting off with simple concepts and then taking away the scaffold. So what are you teaching, Nazma, in year 5? Sorry. That's okay. I can't hear you. But just to answer the question, you know, in a year 5 classroom, you would start, maybe if it was a writing class, you would start with a model of what the writing looks like. Then you could break down that model into different parts and sort of label the parts and say this is what each part of that writing is. And then then the next task, you can just provide them with a blank within that so that they can fill in one of the blanks. And then the next task, you might provide them with 2 blanks. And the 4th task, it might just be a blank sheet with the writing, with the question on it. Look, the way I've, you know, there are many ways that I've seen it done well in primary school, but one of the ways is the use of graphic organisers. So the use of graphic organisers to model information first. So I've actually got an example of a graphic organiser here, and this can provide a scaffold, if you like. So this is one for business statistics, a difficult subject, but you start with a scaffold like this, and this is heavily scaffolded. And then this is the start of the scaffold, if you like, right at the start. So you've got to learn about mean, median, and mode is the start of the scaffold. So it's very scaffolded. It's just a few little things to fill in. And then the later questions get you to incorporate the concepts that you've learnt in the through the graphic organizer. So you're applying these ideas, mean, median, mode, to this discussion point. So it's taking away, you're using the scaffold as the basis for the future discussion. So in a way, you're going from a simple concept to a more difficult idea. So that's just to show you in practice. And I know in primary schools they use graphic organizers fairly consistently in order to build those ideas and then to launch students into new concepts. So that is, I guess, one way to do it. Might have time for a few more questions. 𝗘𝗱𝗂𝗀𝗹𝗱𝗀𝗀𝗧.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is 𝗘𝗱𝗂𝗀𝗧𝗓𝗏, and just one thing that I want to know, that is it necessary to use all the elements of explicit instruction that we have seen in one session, or it's just according to the need of the class?
Yeah, that's it's a really good question. I think it's important to try and use as many as you can. I mean, I think it's difficult to use all of them, and if you at least try, you'll get most of them. But if you can use all of them, it really does strengthen each one, because language adaptation leads to better questioning. Questioning leads to better modelling. Modelling leads to more effective scaffolding. So you can get to the point where you, if you try to use them all, you will at least use 5 of them, maybe out of 7, and you will be able to sort of deliver, effective explicit instruction. But I know, thanks for that. It is difficult. I mean, I think I said at the start, teaching is the most complex profession. I really do. My father's a surgeon, and we argue about this all the time. And I do tell him that my job is more complex than your job. And he doesn't necessarily agree, but I really do think it is. And, getting all these parts together, so you start with good questioning and modelling, and then you build scaffolding into it. It's a very difficult thing to do, but it's worth trying to get all of them in there, I would say. Thanks for the question. Thanks very much. I'm not sure, I must apologise if this is not in order of raising of hands, but I will just, 𝗘𝗱𝗂𝗀𝗹𝗱𝗀𝗧.
Thank you very much, Rohan. So I have one question regarding differentiation. So you talked about differentiation, at the same time you were talking about scaffolding. So
yes.
When the different types of learners and the levels are there, so how you can arrange or design your scaffolding, because you have to take them to the higher level.
Yeah, so look, there are, I mean, I showed differentiation, first of all. Explicit instruction leads to differentiation. So even all elements of explicit instruction lead to differentiation, I guess, not just scaffolding. Scaffolding is probably the most direct form of differentiation, but so for example, questioning is a form of differentiation, modelling is a form of differentiation. So all of those lead to you being able to cater for the different levels of the students, and that's the power of scaffolding. That's the power of explicit instruction, is that if you do all those things, then you do end up differentiating. And that's the amazing thing about it. And differentiation is very difficult, but if you do those things, you do differentiate learning. In terms of the examples for scaffolding, look, I guess there are so many ways you can do it. I mean, the graphic organizer is one way of building a scaffold, but so is the models that I showed in that example where we had a very visible model of an essay, and it was broken down by numbers, and you saw the numbers for each of the sentences, and so the model was broken down. So that is the first part of scaffolding, because you could then, the next model you produce could take away the numbers from the essay. So if that's an example, you start with numbers in an essay, and then you take away those numbers, and then you've built a sort of scaffold, because it starts simply with the numbers beside each sentence and an explanation of each sentence and what it does, and then it goes to a more complex scaffold where you've taken the numbers away. So that may be an example. You know, the other scaffolds that I've seen are annotations. So when you annotate a piece of writing and you write beside each section what that piece of writing is doing, and then you take away those annotations. So the student then has to explain themselves what that writing is about. But I guess the other form of scaffolding is when you get students to annotate work themselves. So you start with annotations, you take those annotations away, and then you get the students to annotate the work themselves. So that, I guess, is an example of scaffolding we've used pretty extensively. But the other example is this graphic organizer, which provides a scaffold and then builds into more complex questions. I hope that's answered your question, very cool. There's a few examples. Thanks very much for asking it. Thank you very much. I think 𝗘𝗱𝗂𝗀𝗹𝗱𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀
I just want to ask you that what might prevent us from applying explicit instructions explicit instructions in different grades. Say if I am giving classes to 6 or 7 grades at the same time, at the same week, so how do I change my instructions?
Yes. Wow. Yeah, that's right. The complexity of teaching. Look, there's no easy answer to that. I think you have to work very, very hard and build resources, because this does require. I think it requires a lot of effort. There's no doubt about it. Explicit instruction is very effective, but it does require a lot of resource building. But having said that, I think there are common resource development and techniques that you can apply broadly across all grades. So, for example, that annotation piece that I was talking about before, you can annotate resources at different levels. So let's say if you're teaching a grade 2 class, you can still annotate a reading and say, look, this is what this reading is about. And then take those and then ask them to write in the annotations themselves. And you could do that with different levels. So you could build sort of a more common practice resource. You could also use more common graphic organizers, but things like questioning is a real something you can apply to all grades, and something that doesn't require huge amounts of preparation. There are questioning techniques, like Socratic questioning technique, that you can apply to different across different grades. I think also things like language adaptation is really important, to be mindful of the language you're using to different grades and to change the level of that language. But I'm not going to lie to you, I think things like modelling and scaffolding do require quite a bit of resource development. They do require a bit of resource development. I think things like questioning, language adaptation, monitoring and feedback, I think that they are all things that can be done relatively quickly and simply across the grades. But I will say this one thing that I think is really fundamental to all of this explicit instruction that should be applied at all times if possible, and that is to make learning visible. Make it visible. So if you've got a task that everyone in the class is doing, put the task up on a screen or put it up on a board and get people to come and write information in so everybody in the class can see it. If you've got annotations that you've added to a resource, put it up on a screen so that everybody in the class can see it. So I think if you can make learning as visible as possible, then things work very well. I guarantee you that all of you, from the examples I've shown today, are probably most likely to remember the example of 𝗘𝗱𝗂𝗸𝗱𝗚 rubbing a balloon on his hair, and the example of Yvonne using the writing, the numbered writing, because it was visible. You could see it, and you could see the interaction with it as well. So I guess this is the thing with explicit instruction. If you can make things as visible as possible, then you're going to get a lot of modelling happening. So I guess 𝗘𝗱𝘂𝗸𝗱𝗀, there's no resource development is required, particularly for modelling and scaffolding, but there are other things that you can do that are more generic and can be applied pretty easily. I hope that answers your question or goes some way to answer your question. It's a very, very profound question, actually.
Mr. Bates, I have an opinion to share.
Yes, please.
According to my practice of the last 10 years, like I've been teaching junior school and then now I'm training teachers. So I feel from today's session that I learned this term scaffolding on day one or an introductory session of any lesson. We do not usually require scaffolding because the topic is new, the concept is new, and because of which the scaffolding is actually not very, I would say, useful for day one or first session. But when we are going through the other components like language adaptation and modeling and questioning and following up on whatever we've done in the beginning of the session, I think scaffolding can be started from day two. And also, someone who was asking about teaching across levels, I think it depends on a teacher's preparation and the way the teacher is planning the lesson for different levels. Depending on that, they can model or prepare their scaffolding technique. Am I right?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think scaffolding doesn't start. It's probably the last part of explicit instruction. And we didn't show much scaffolding today through the examples, because most of the time is actually spent modeling. Modeling lays the base for scaffolding, if you like. So if you can model something, then you can start building scaffolds. You can take away the scaffold and make it more difficult. But you are absolutely right that you don't normally apply the scaffold to much later on. you know, across the different grades, teaching across different grades is very tricky, and I don't think there's any way out of. I think resource development is very important for building those modelling and that scaffolding. So thank you very much for that opinion. Folks, it's great to have so many questions. I really do appreciate it. I just don't want to. I don't want to keep. There's 412 people still here, so I just wanted to see if maybe if people want to remain, they certainly can. But I certainly wouldn't take it personally if on a Friday you wanted to leave and do other things. I mean, I think it's just tremendous that we've had the participation that we've had, and it just shows how interested people are. But I'm more than happy just to field questions, and people can stay and listen to the answers if they wish, or may wish to leave. Okay, so I think Umi.
Yes, sir. Mr. Bates, this is Subhanevi Shahab over here. I just wanted to ask about time and patience. You said the time frame. Actually, the time frame is always specific in the classes we are given. So
Right.
how do we give a student 2 or 5 minutes more for a question? As we have seen, the teacher who was asking, was supporting the student to, yes, you can go forward and you can ask for the, you can ask, and then supporting questions, and then the students was following the answers and was a bit trembling to the answers and then answering. But for the large number of students, what do we do in the classroom? As our classes is a very specific time frame. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a dilemma that we all face, I think, is a battle with time. Now, the thing that I've advocated for everyone to use, and which seems to work very well, is to use programs that allow people to input their answers. So it's very difficult to ask lots of questions to different students because that takes a lot of time. So I guess the first thing to reduce the time that question asking takes is to use software that allows students to show their answers to questions. So again, this idea of visible learning. So whether that be a Google slide, I mean, Google Slides are really good, or a software like Poll Everywhere, where students can just show their answers to questions. I think one of the most effective ways is to use something like Poll Everywhere, because you can see how many students understand the answer to the question or not. And it saves you a bit of time in being able to know what gaps need to be filled or not. So in my classes, I try to use that really extensively, and I find that saves me a whole lot of time when having to ask questions, because first of all, I can see where the gaps are in the students' responses. I can see what they're missing, and I can ask targeted questions around that. So I guess my answer would be it's not easy, first of all, and wherever possible, we should actually be trying to reduce content coverage, is my view. Content should not be king. Content is a vehicle for skill development. But so that's the first thing. But the second thing is where possible, use a polling software where you can see everybody's answer to the question and the gaps in those answers.
Thank you,
so
Ms.
that you
Bates.
can ask the right question. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. Yes.
Thanks very much. Appreciate the question. Okay, so 𝗘𝗱𝗂𝗸𝗱𝗀𝗀𝗱𝗲𝗀, did you, sorry, I'll unmute. I've got 𝗘𝗱𝗂𝗱𝗲𝗀𝗱𝗀.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering, a lot of institutions in Bangladesh right now are not very technologically advanced. So you gave a lot of options with technology in how to reduce time or how to make classrooms more interactive.
Yeah.
How would you suggest otherwise without technology?
Well, the way I suppose is to mimic the technology. So do you have a lot of whiteboards around your rooms?
We do.
You do, yeah. So look, I think it's very important this visible learning is really, really important. If you can get students just to write the answers on the whiteboards, you know, as simple as that, just getting them up as much as possible to write answers on whiteboards, and you can see the gaps in their understanding. So that's I think really important. You know, I think the other thing to make learning, I suppose, more, or to make it more visible, is for students, you know, to have a guided worksheet, but to get students to swap and comment on each other's work in groups is a common technique. I mean, these are very simple techniques. The think, pair, share technique, which you've all heard of, I'm sure. You know, just getting students to do a scaffold or modelled worksheet, then getting them to share what they have with a person beside them, and then getting them to share in groups, demonstrates what they know and don't know, and the gaps in their knowledge, if you like. And explicit instruction is all about identifying and filling those gaps in knowledge. So I think there's two things there. One is to demonstrate on a visibly on the screens around, or the whiteboards around the classroom, as much as you can. And I think the second there is just using those collaborative in-class techniques with the worksheets as the base for those techniques. But the other thing I'll say too is that sometimes teachers have a worksheet, and it's a really good worksheet, but they cover it way too quickly. They just say, all right, students, fill that in. And it's a perfectly well modelled worksheet that breaks information down. But when they don't do is then go into other stages of explicit instruction. They don't then explore that worksheet with more questioning. They don't then say, okay, what happens if we take away this part of the worksheet? Can you explain this part of the worksheet without the question being there? And that's a form of scaffolding. So I think sometimes teachers, they have this great worksheet they might be using, but they stop short of using it with explicit instruction in mind. They don't go far enough, if you like. So I would say there are techniques to make that go a bit further. One is to make the worksheet collaborative, so you can see the gaps in the knowledge. You can monitor the gaps in the knowledge. The other is for students to, or the other is to use questioning techniques to really unpack that worksheet a little bit more. Yeah, sorry, I hope that answers the question, but it is a bit tougher without technology, for sure, sometimes.
Right, Rohan, I think we are reaching the time where we'll have to let everyone go. Would it be okay if we can take over and close the session?
Yes, sure. Look, I just want to thank everyone for their questions and for their interest. Thanks very much.
Excellent. So I'll quickly take over. My name is Dr. Sandeep Ananthanarayanan. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of STS. Eduko is our group company. At the outset, I would request you to write, all the teachers to write to info@edukopathways.com. I'll repeat the email, info@edukopathways.com. Please write to us your feedback about the session's learning, and any questions. Your feedback about the session to info@edukopathways.com. This is critical for successful certification. Please write with your full name, your designation, and please ensure that you give us your learning from this session. If you were able to see one of the slides of Mr. Rohan, he had given a few pointers, but you can give us any feedback that you like. But we need to have that email from you. Now, I'll very quickly thank the session host, Mr. Rohan. Explicit teaching is something that we never were face-to-face with, but now we understand it's a process of breaking down information into form which students can easily understand and use. I'm sure the teachers realize that it involves ensuring that what a student learns, how he or she learns it, and also how the student demonstrates what he or she has learned is a match to that student's readiness level, interest, and preferred mode of learning. It was wonderful seeing Rohan show how explicit instruction can be achieved at the presentation stage, questioning, tasks and activities, monitoring of students, even feedback. And of course, scaffolding is something absolutely new, and I hope teachers across Bangladesh today learned about it. For this workshop, Eduko has received an overwhelming response from teachers from across the country. This gives us enormous encouragement that we are moving in the right track. A series of such programs will be held throughout this year, and we would like to hear back from all of you on crucial topics we can pick for our next workshops. Eduko is one of the leading companies in the international admission space. We have been at the forefront of ensuring global research and practices are shared with the Bangladesh academic fraternity. We are committed to ensure that the world's leading institutions like Monash partner in such exercises. My deepest thanks to the whole Monash community and school leadership that has been here. I'm delighted to have with us today the top leadership of various institutions and would like to take this opportunity to thank all the senior leaders present, starting with Mr. 𝗘𝗱𝗂𝗪𝗲, who is the head of IT for this whole exercise. Thank you, Mr. Mustafiz, for ensuring that technically this exercise went off seamlessly. Mr. Mahfouz Anand, editor, Daily Star, for the invaluable media partnership. From Eduko, we have Mr. Zarif Munir, who's the director of Eduko. Thanks to him for joining us. Mr. James Domes, head of counseling, and Mr. Qazi Tushar, the chief marketing officer of Eduko, who has been very diligently responding to queries. A big thanks to Austrade, Government of Australia, to support this learning session. Sarah, Trade Commissioner South Asia, and Mustafizur Rahman, Director Australian Trade and Investment Commission, which is Austrade. Thank you for joining us and giving us this invaluable support for this inaugural exercise. Most importantly, from Monash College, we have Ms. Jo Mithin. She's the Chief Executive Officer. Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Serena Fernandez, Associate Director, Strategic Communication and Marketing. Ms. Yui, who's the Manager, Partnership and Development at Monash College. And of course, the topmost thanks to Mr. Rowan Bates, Head of Teaching and Learning. I think all of us, deserve to give him a big round of applause for having taken such a fantastic session. Thank you, Rohan. This was absolutely enlightening session for all the teachers out here. But finally, and most importantly, all teachers and principals of schools across Bangladesh who have joined us today, thank you for taking the time off please ensure once again that you write to info@edukopathways.com with your full name, designation, and feedback about today's session. This is critical for successful certification. We look forward to meeting you in our future training and development sessions. Once again, thank you all. And with these words, I call this session to a close. Thanks, everybody. You may leave now. Thank you.